Hi, I'm Paige Roberts, and today I will be talking about breastfeeding. In this video, I will touch a little bit on what to expect at first, some benefits for the mother, some benefits for the baby, a little bit about pumping, some feeding cues the baby will give off, some positions for breastfeeding, and then a little bit more education on the whole concept. So, when a mother begins breastfeeding, you're going to see something called colostrum, which is the first milk that the body produces, and it's usually a yellow, golden color and a small amount. So, it's nothing to be alarmed about if you think that you're not making enough milk for your baby, because this colostrum is highly concentrated with nutrients and antibodies. So, the baby is going to get all the nutrients it needs right away in that small amount, and then the antibodies will be able to fight off infections and prevent infections. Another good thing about colostrum is that if your baby is in the NICU and then can't eat on their own, if they have like a feeding tube, you can do mouth care with colostrum. So you take that little bit in a syringe, put a little bit in their mouth, and then it'll end up going down in their system and they'll get those nutrients and antibodies. And then as well, the baby's stomach is very small when they're first born, so this small amount usually fills them up. Some benefits for the mother is faster postpartum weight loss, as well as decreased risk for osteoporosis, and a decreased risk of ovarian cancer, breast cancer, and endometrial cancer. Some benefits for the baby include passive immunity. That is because the mother's antibodies that they have already in them is being passed down to the baby through that breast milk. And it also provides good gut health. And with that, it decreases diarrhea and constipation. It also has a decreased incidence of diabetes, ear infections, allergies, asthma, and obesity. That is also due to the antibodies and nutrients that are in the breast milk. And there's also a decreased risk of sudden infant death syndrome. So, pumping is something that can be done when mother and baby are separated. So if the baby goes to the NICU, or if, baby has to stay in the hospital a little longer and mother has to go home, the mom can pump and then send the breast milk down to NICU, and the baby can have that milk supply. And it's also important to do to stimulate the milk production. So the more you're pumping, the more you're making, and the more is going to come out each time. Right, so some feeding cues that the baby will do is, one is rooting. So rooting is when the baby will turn its head, almost like they would turn, if you're holding them, and they would turn their head towards your breast because they're hungry. Another is tugging on clothes, like they'll grab you, like, hey mom, I'm hungry. They will suck their hands as if they were sucking a nipple. They'll smack their lips. And then once a little late feeding cue, once they're very hungry, is that they'll start crying and fussing, which actually makes it harder to latch and harder to calm them down. Some positions that are super important to follow is baby's nose to mom's nipple. That will ensure that you're getting a good latch. You'll have the baby's chin to your breast. That follows with nose to nipple and getting a good latch. So you can hold the baby in a football hold, which kind of looks like this, like you'll hold them here and then towards your breast, and the baby can feed that way. Or you can do cross cradle, where you'll hold them across your body and they can feed off the other breast. And it's super important that with these positions, you need to change positions often. Right, and some education is that it's very important to feed on demand, especially to avoid the baby crying and fussing, so that It's easier to get them latched on and calm down. You should feed every 2 to 3 hours, and usually the saying is 8 or more in 24, meaning 8 or more feeds in 24 hours. And going along with changing positions when breastfeeding, you should also alternate the breasts, because one will get more engorged than the other. It'll be a little bit more painful, so it's definitely important to alternate. And when you burp the baby, you should burp in between your breasts. And then before removing them from your breasts, you should release the suction to avoid any trauma to the nipples or the baby's mouth. And then self-expression. So you can self-express with your hands, or you can use a pump. That's going to help with engorgement, which can be very painful, especially if you're not alternating breasts when feeding. And you should watch the baby when you feed. Do not watch the clock. Watch the baby to make sure that they're actually feeding the whole time, and you're not just looking, oh, it's been 15 minutes by looking at the clock, but the baby didn't really eat, so it's important to watch the baby the whole time. And you should avoid alcohol, tobacco, and THC when breastfeeding so that these do not go into the baby's system. And a little bit more is that you should look for signs of trauma in nipples, such as cracking and bleeding. And that's usually caused by poor latching. And then if you have any issues with your nipples, you should wash with water only. I'm sure you wouldn't like to taste soap on your food, so it's important to keep that so the baby doesn't get a nasty taste. And then you should ensure a proper latch to avoid any of these traumas like cracking and bleeding. So make sure that the baby's mouth is wide open, it's nose to nipple, and chin to chest. That's all I have.